Hello everyone. I'm very, very pleased to have Ben Pyle here from Climate Resistance. I think that's the right Twitter handle, CLIM8 Resistance. Is that right?
Right, yeah, figure eight, yeah.
And Ben is extraordinarily thorough, level-headed researcher into all things to do with climate. And one thing we wanted to go through today is actually one of the very good pieces of research he's done about the methods that are used to pretend that there's a big consensus between what we're doing on climate. So do you want to say a few words, Ben, about what you're up to and your website and your work?
Well, the work, thanks for having me on, by the way. The project I began in about 2007. And a growing theme at the time was that a lot of people on my side of the debate that was sort of curious about certainly the politics and had some questions about the soundness of the science that was being put forward. And then when you look at these green organizations, they were enormously well funded, budgets of hundreds of millions of dollars, spending between them billions of dollars a year, mostly on propaganda, mostly on political campaigning. So there's vast operations. So this sort of it goes well beyond hypocrisy. It's a total loss of sense of proportion. Anyway,
just to build up to that, I think we want to just do a couple of introductory slides, and also just to sort of clear up any misunderstanding that there's a denial of climate change. So I think actually quite the opposite. This is the first slide. You can actually see the long-term temperature changes on Earth, and you can see this extraordinarily long time horizon where the temperature's been all over the place, and actually the period where we are now is not particularly high, and this is the period where the alarmists always sort of cut off the beginning sections and zoom in on sort of 1890 onwards, or somewhere around that time. So I guess on the contrary, we actually recognize there is climate change and that human activity does contribute to that. It's not a denial, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. They're very keen on posting the measurements of the measurements of the post-industrial era and attributing any change. So any change is a deviation. There's a myth. There's a green myth of and it's a very ideological myth of homeostasis, of stability, and you can find scientists sort of very, very prominent scientists, it's not fringe, speaking of this notion of balance. And NASA scientist Gavin Schmidt's one who always I use as an example, and he went on a TV show to explain his views on climate, and he said we've built society around a very sensitive niche, very easy. He believes that the whole of society, our agriculture, our housing, our buildings, our ways of life are all established on this sort of relatively stable climate, in his terminology, right? So, and it's just not true, and so this idea that it's going to get 1 degree warmer as an average, or 2, let's even say 5, and that everyone's housing is going to suddenly be inappropriate for them, it's just crazy. I mean, you have to be driven by a mystical ideology to think that's our main problem, if you like. But this sort of took the form of a lot of green organizations saying, oh, this is terrible, Bolsonaro's reversed all this wonderful policy that protected the environment, and again it was, I mean, maybe there was a small increase, but not this radical story that was being presented, and ditto little Greta was sort of the Arctic is on fire, which is sort of like this, again, another symbolic image, like kind of like the glaciers and the ice sheets being literally, somehow turned into flames, when of course it was enormous forests in Siberia that were catching fire, as they always have done. So it's cynical, a lot of it, the alarmism, and it's reproduced. It's produced very much with the intention of alarm, literally alarming people, and then that's reproduced by people who don't know any better, like Swedish teenage truants, who take this stuff at face value, and have never had cause to sort of investigate.
Yeah. Well, let's maybe go to that climate assembly. So. The Climate Assembly heard from a lot of scientists. They had some discussion. There was sort of almost unanimity of agreement from the public that they want, they want more action on climate change. And why don't you tell us what the real story was of actually the people who were speaking and how it was organized? And I can from my side add in a few details of some of those things.
Well, yeah. So I think there was a bit of a change. There was a bit of a shock to the green agenda in the mid 2010s, and so that is sort of the starting point for the stuff I've done on the financial sector, and also the other stuff like the emergence of Extinction Rebellion. One of whose demands was a climate assembly, declaration of a climate emergency, net zero by 2025, and the formation of climate assemblies. And according to their logic, if you could have a panel like a jury of ordinary people, then the rest of the population would see them and the decisions they would see themselves in the composition of the panel, and then be more sympathetic to what the panel said than they are with politicians. But they knew that it was unpalatable. So this research from the Green Alliance there's a document called Building a Mandate for Climate Action, I think, or climate policy, by a researcher, a professor who had been the director of the Green Alliance, called Rebecca Willis. He's pretty notorious activist. And in this report, it's an interesting research in its own right. It consists of lots of interviews with MPs, and the MPs are all telling her straight up, and she's reporting it, nobody in the public is asking us about climate change. The only people who are interested in climate change are these very easily characterized muesli pushers, right? There's not this groundswell of green uprising, whatever you want to call it. So they knew there's a problem with the mandate. They knew they had to find a mandate some other way, and this is understood, right? So MPs understood this, that there's no public demand. The government understood it. All of those green NGOs, all of those green campaigning organizations, they all knew. It's indisputable. The research shows it. They all knew that the public was not demanding this radical policy agenda. So, well, how do we get a legitimate? How do we legitimize this agenda then? How do we make it sort of democratic? So and the operation was managed by 4 expert leads. One of them was Chris Stark, who is the chief exec of the Committee on Climate Change. It's statutory, well, maybe it's not statutory, I don't know. The Quango, the people that set the climate budget. Another was Lorraine Whitmarsh, right? So who is this director of a policy research unit called CAST, the Centre for climate and social transformation. This is like Nudge, this is an academic nudge unit. It's a very, very well-funded organization who sort of attempt to bring psychology to bear on changing people's attitudes and behaviors. Shrinking basically, and a couple of others. So they were conflicted, right? They're posh activists. They're part of the political establishment. They're all committed to radical changes to society, and they were there to help guide the public towards making the decisions, right? So they got 100 or so people together, and they put experts in front of them and then seemingly let them make decisions. And it turns out all of the experts are just in the extended networks of these expert leads. They're all their mates. It was a complete sham. And then, of course, the sort of the findings of the decisions made by the Climate Assembly weren't written up by the Climate Assembly, subject to the approval of the Climate Assembly members. It was written up by the 4 expert leads, and they just lied. And so the whole thing was a puppet show in the first place, and they even bodged it up as a puppet show, right? So I think it was probably the most remarkable act of cynical bad faith on behalf of the parliamentary bodies that were involved in it, and the Green Blob organisations and the rest. I mean, you had people standing up, telling people that a single expert standing up saying, well, green diets are better for you because meat causes cancer. It's just ridiculous kind of propaganda that was being put in front of these people. They resisted. They weren't fools. I think that's the most important thing. They weren't idiots, and they heard these experts putting only one side of very radical arguments to them, and they said no. This is nuts.
And I think you'll see on the slide here actually the link to the spiked article that goes through this in a lot of detail, which I found shocking. It's one of the things I read last year, and it stayed with me because as you said, it's a staged, managed, you call it a puppet show, which is pretty close description of what it is.
Which, so in a sense, you could sort of take the view philanthropy enables civil society, but then there comes a point at which it dominates civil society, and we'll come on to that. But my concern is that these aren't autonomous organizations. Their funding comes with conditions. So you look at the ECF, the European Climate Foundation's financial statements for 2020, and it turns out it received $30 million, euros, in anonymous donations in 2020. So we don't know which billionaire philanthropist is supporting this. That just that 1 year, just their anonymous donations were sufficient to keep the spikes or the GWPF afloat for a century.
Yeah.
So there are at least 3 orders of magnitude difference.
Yeah.
There's this, and that really does raise the question of funding, because if there is this amount of money sloshing around only on one side of the debate, then that debate might be being manipulated. Well, it's not. It doesn't even exist. There is no debate. Nobody from the other side will permit there to be a debate, and they will smear people who want to debate, and they'll traduce any climate skeptic and raise questions about run hatchet jobs in the media. There are even civil society organisations funded by the ECF intended to do nothing but smear people who take a different view on subjects like climate change.
Yeah. Well, I'll just share with you the numbers I have, because I've been looking at this bit. We can talk about the relevant players, but from the European Climate Foundation, which, as you said, they funded part of the Climate Assembly, who then just said a statement saying, well, their funding doesn't influence what we do, which is very hard to believe. But the European Climate Foundation, in turn, is funded by the Children's Investment Fund Foundation, and they contributed $52 million in 2020 alone to the European Climate Foundation. As he said, it's very opaque exactly where the money comes from, but going from the side of that particular funder, one funder, it's clear that's the biggest single funder. The others, as you said, are not at all clear where it comes from. And then in terms of scale of the Children's Investment Fund Foundation, they're spending around about $300 million per year on various initiatives, including climate, and climate's the biggest, which is accounting, I'm using rough numbers, for about half of their $300 million spend, and the size of that endowment is $6 billion. So I mean, this is the sort of 800K gorilla of the climate funding, as far as I can work out. And the philanthropist behind the Children's Investment Fund Foundation is Chris Hahn, who's the chairman, who in Bloomberg is estimated to be worth 8.3 billion personally. So, as you said, the size of the numbers involved are very high, and there's always a question, you know, is philanthropy supporting civil society, or is it now running a civil society, and particularly this green agenda?
I think something needs to be in that equation to point out what the perspective is. 150 million a year is greater at a greater rate than all of the political parties at all levels of government operating in the United Kingdom. Their entire operations, all donations, all campaigning at every single election is less than that. Now that's not political party campaigning, but that is political campaigning, because they're addressing, they're not, you know, when Christopher Hone spends, I think it's 158 billion for million for 2020, when he gives money to climate organizations, they're not going around and spending that money on making a nice park, you know, or like delivering some frontline services in the way that sort of a conservation charity might be. I mean, maybe one or two of them are. That's all lobbying. That's all vapor. That's all putting pressure on local authorities to abolish cars, using their money. More effective, perhaps, than sort of trying to get policies changed at the national level, because they know that there will be, if there's a national campaign to abolish cars from high streets, then there's going to be a different kind of conversation. But if you can use local, the dominance of local party infrastructure to achieve the same result, then well, that's good, isn't it? And
I was also going to add that, given his background, there's another big element to what he's doing, which is pressuring the pension funds, because obviously that's a sector he's from as a hedge fund manager. He understands very well how all that works, and he is pressuring the pension funds, including by funding organizations involved in litigation, to incorporate ESG into their investments.
And you know, as late as November, you can find a lot of ESG campaigners and journalists, you know, right across the sector, saying how wonderful and important ESG is and how great it is that it's driven investment away from fossil fuels, or from hydrocarbons, we should say, from investment in hydrocarbon sectors towards these, you know, vapor firms that don't do anything, but they've got great ESG scores, right?
Yeah.
So it's this ESG bubble that is in turn made it difficult for the hydrocarbon sectors to increase production in the wake of COVID recovery. So this has created a supply crisis, because they can't hire, they can't buy new plant, they can't recommission mothballed sites and so on. So this has led to these extraordinary prices we've seen. This is a direct result. And the reality, so people, it's quite clear, they intended to starve the hydrocarbon sectors of capital such that it would not be possible for those sectors to operate, right? And they did it because they knew that it would not be possible to do it through democratic politics, because people would find it unpalatable, let's say, right? It was going to cause chaos. So these people, these philanthropic foundations, they instigated that process, knowing full well what the result was going to be, and central bankers and financial ministries were entirely complicit in that process, and they watched as all the prices went up, and they watched as the supply crisis was formed. And it turns out that all the claims that the green economy, the green parts of the economy, were the only and the fastest growing sectors of the economy, also turn out to be false. There's been no growth in the green economy for 10 years. So it's all been a stack of lies. It's all based on technologies that don't exist or cannot deliver, and none of it has been advanced on the basis of a democratic mandate.
I just one point I wanted to make, and see if you agree with this, on that whole, I think the whole process of the carbon budget, where the state decides which things you're going to do, like the way you're going to heat your own home, is just incredible overreach from the state. And that also, so everyone knows who's watching this, elimination of meat, introduction of insects, that's also all in the 6th carbon budget. It's buried in one of the appendices, but it's all in there. Basically, every single aspect of your life is, literally every aspect of your life is regulated in that 6th carbon budget. And I just wanted to just raise the question of this Lord Debon, who is actually running this, who, at the same time runs a family business advising companies on how to deal with sustainability, and it doesn't seem to blush doing that, because obviously is completely conflicted. The harder he makes the 6th carbon budget, the more business he drums up for his adjustments for sustainability. And he also has somewhere, I think it's about 12 board directorships to deal with sustainability, and nobody seems to bat an eyelid. I mean, I'm happy to go on this channel and call him a grifter.
There's a few webcasts with Debon where he's sitting next to his log fire. He's burning wood in his nice little. He's got a mansion too. It's nice little.
Yeah.
But whereas everyone who's going to have to suffer for the policies that the CCC is creating are going to be in 2-bed flats, struggling to heat whatever they've got with a air source heat pump.
Good. Okay, so I think, at least for me, that if I could try and summarize where we got to today, it's basically to be very careful about what the funding is behind these organizations. So, if you hear something like the European Climate Foundation, it really means nothing to most people. And we've had a go at rolling back, what's standing behind that, looking 2 levels up. And I think what's clear is there's really gigantic sums of money involved, really coming from extremely wealthy individuals pushing a green agenda. And I think for me, it was an eye-opener. You said that this 150 million plus minus dollars is sort of more than all the political parties in the UK added together spend in an election year. I mean, that really puts into perspective the massive amount of funding going into green. And again, it's the opposite of the impression you get that it's all these big bad oil companies keeping us hooked on fossil fuels. It's actually the green lobby today are the guys with money. And, within that money, there's all kinds of conflicts of interest. So, you mentioned that because they declare these other businesses, there is no conflict, but that's not how it works for normal people. If you're, for example, writing the 6th carbon budget and you're making money advising people how to comply with the 6th carbon budget, you're conflicted. There's no 2 ways around that. So I think those were the things that really sort of came home for me. And I think my conclusion, I don't know where you are, is that really the government has no business actually writing a 6 carbon budget, trying to dictate every single aspect of your life. I mean, they can set taxes and have policies, but they don't have the right to tell you, you mustn't eat this, you must eat that, you can't heat this, you can't use that. I mean, it's completely nuts as far as I can see. And hopefully, the more you expose of this, the more people will resist and reject these impositions.
Yeah, that's all good. And I think that's the issue is that people have taken the problem for us is often that people take for granted the problem of climate change. And so it's a radical, as you say, the government has assumed this right to tell us how our lives are going to have to be reorganized. But environmentalism, this sort of the climate agenda, was from the outset, before even there was any evidence of climate change, it was about a radical reorganization of society in which global institutions and governments design for you your lifestyle. And that's step one. Step two was finding the science and the evidence and the scientific arguments. And then step three has been things like using finance, using money to change society rather than using democratic institutions to determine policy. And I think once we've explained that to people, once people understand that, and they can see that, and the evidence is extremely clear in my view, then I think maybe there might begin to be a change. But until then, it's going to be hard work and a lot of pain as well from these policies.
Yeah. So essentially, this is a top-down Great Reset policy agenda, with climate being the hobby horse to push that aspect of it. And I think in many ways, COVID response was also part of the Great Reset. It was the smokescreen behind which they were resetting our lives in the way that they thought was appropriate, as far as they had decided, again, without any kind of democratic discussion.
Possibly. I mean, I would draw a distinction between a plot and an intention. Mm-hmm. And in many senses, I think Great Reset is almost an attempt at window dressing after the fact. The intention has been there for a very long time.
Yeah.
Longer than I've been alive. The design for an ecological order, as it were, has been around since at least the 60s and 70s. You can see that in the first United Nations Environment Programme, which was convened by Maurice Strong, the oil tycoon, coincidentally, and funded by the Rockefellers, who are a lot. So these green initiatives have been around for a very long time, always developed in the interest and advanced by eco billionaires, let's call them. So in a sense, nothing has really changed in the last half century. It's just that the things have developed, and like it's important to understand that their intentions are configured, but they're not very good at executing their plans, because between their dream and the realization is reality, right? Is that people don't want to be treated in this way. There's a lot of material reality in the way, like a lot of physics that is inconvenient to the green movement. And as much as they can align global institutions and NGOs and civil society organizations, they still struggle with their role in society too. It's not. I wouldn't say so. The WEF, the resets, and even the green agenda, they have influence, but not necessarily power. So I worry when people talk about the Great Reset as a fait accompli, that it's a done deal. But actually, even our government is cognizant of the fact that to implement net zero as fast as as the likes of XR, who incidentally we haven't pointed out are funded by Christopher Hone. I should add that in there. You know, he's paying for these green anti-capitalists to go and sing and dance outside banks. Make of that what you will. These organisations, you know, if we went ahead as fast with the agenda as they want, there would be a civil war, no question. There is no precedent in history for such a radical transformation of society and such a reduction in the standards of living that has not required tanks and troops on streets pointing their guns at civilians. It's that simple. It's far too radical. So in a sense, you know, so putting that back together in terms of the Great Reset, in many senses, COVID and the lockdowns advanced their agenda so much they lost control of it. They advanced the intentions. And it's more than they can deal with. So nobody had heard of the WEF before COVID, or very few people had. But now everyone knows who they are, and most people know who they are, and they think they're weirdos, and they want nothing to do with them. And so they've created a trust issue for themselves. They've created a very negative publicity for themselves, and we should capitalize on that rather than assume that they're our masters.
Yeah, I don't think either of us do, and I think there's several million or maybe even tens of millions in the UK that also don't feel that way. So, yeah. But it's very good. I think I'd really like to thank you today for the time, and I think the Assembly story is in a way a small story, but it just provides such a perfect window. The Climate Assembly, how it's funded, who was there, how it was set up. It just provides a perfect window into the way that the methods that they use to try and get sort of democratic credentials, which don't exist. You think you brilliantly called it the democratic deficit. They're trying to create out of thin air these democratic credentials that they just haven't got. And I think for that reason, it's just such a perfect story to pick apart for viewers to understand the sort of sleight of hand, dirty tricks involved in creating that illusion of buy-in from the people that's just not there.
Right, yeah.
Good, and I'm going to put, sorry, go on.
Sorry.
Now I'm going to put up on the website here the link to your website, which is climate-resistance.org, if I have that right. And you also have a page on Spiked of the articles that you've written over the last couple of years. They're also all there. And on Twitter, you are CLIM8 Resistance. Is that?
Yeah.
Good.
Right. I've also got a YouTube channel with a few videos.
Okay.
A few years and a couple of live streams that were produced during COP26 with some proper experts who have something to say about the agenda.
I'll put the link up to that as well so people can find it.
Thanks for having me.
Good. Thank you very much, Ben. It's been a pleasure.